Back when I was 17, I used to babysit for our neighbor, who at the time was a single mother who happened to be going through a particularly nasty divorce. She had 2 young sons, one of which was 8 years old, while the other was only around 18 months. They were absolutely adorable and very well-behaved kids, but you could tell that they were going through a lot, and the older one definitely showed signs of stress over the whole thing. And I'll never forget the time he asked me why his daddy couldn't live with them anymore, and it honestly broke my heart. Not because I didn't have an answer for him, but because to hear it would have just been too much to bear, too much for anyone to bear. Anyway, after a few months of being alone, she finally decided to get back on the old dating horse. I was so happy for her. After such a rough time, she deserved to find happiness again, to find someone who had the wherewithal to be a real father to these 2 adorable little boys. So one night she leaves on her date and says she'll be back around midnight and not a moment later. Only she doesn't tell me exactly where she's going, and I have no way to contact her because this was back in the 80s and no one had a cell phone. Well, they did exist, but not in the available commercial sense. It was all landlines back then. Otherwise, this might not have gone the way it did. So on the night in question, I'm chilling on the couch, absent-mindedly flicking through the TV channels. I put the kids to bed an hour previous. They're sleeping like rocks, and everything seems fine and dandy. When suddenly there's a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but then again, it wasn't my house, so I felt kind of obligated to answer and take a message or whatever. Only as I started walking down the hallway towards the front door, whoever is on the other side starts banging against it and cursing up a storm. "Cheryl, I know you're in there. Open the door." Now, what was exactly said, I don't remember, but I'm not keen on repeating some of the words they used. It was really, really harsh. So I'm just frozen, looking at the door in total fright when the oldest boy came flying out of his room and down the stairs, running to the door and yelling, "Daddy's home!" I grab him, pull him away from the door. I had no idea what this guy's intentions were, and after all, they were probably divorced for a freaking reason. But I almost fainted with fear when I hear the words, "I got my shotgun in my truck, and tonight, I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." He screams this, but then I hear his footsteps move up the gravel path. It appeared he wasn't bluffing at all. And if that was the case, then our lives were clearly in danger. When he gets back, he's banging on the door and threatening to start shooting through it if no one opens. I grab both kids and run out the back door and across the street to my house where my mom calls the police. When the police arrive a few minutes later, they actually find the ex-husband taking a massive dump on Cheryl's porch. He was arrested, and I wait with the kids at my house for their mom to show up. Everyone was in tears by that point, even my mom, who was normally a pretty reserved woman. I mean, maybe he was just having a manic episode and no one was in real danger, but honestly, it was one of the most terrifying nights of my entire life. First and last time I babysat, back when I was 16 in the early 80s. I'd just gotten a driver's license and needed gas and insurance money for the old beat-up car I'd bought. I was watching 2 boys, about 6 and 10, while parents went out to celebrate some anniversary or something. They had promised to be home at 11. At the time, cell phones were pretty rare, so no way to contact them other than calling the restaurant. Evening was going great until about 9:30 when their large, aggressive Doberman goes crazy running around the house barking and growling before running into the basement, refusing to come up. Sort of freaks me out a bit because this dog is huge, aggressive, and very protective of the house and kids. I do a quick check of the house and kids and everyone was okay. I let the dog stay in the basement, put kids to bed at around 10 as instructed by the parents. Job done. So I'm watching TV at around 10:30 when, suddenly, I begin to smell something burning. Running into the youngest boy's room and find the oldest boy in bed with him. Both are asleep, so I wake them both and tell them that we need to get the dog and go outside. But the dog just straight up refuses to leave the basement. And I had to prioritize. So I get the kids outside and tell them to sit in the front yard while I go in to call the fire department. Not showing good judgment here, but I was 16. Oldest says, "I left a candle burning under my bed." As I go back in, yup, a candle under their bed, since apparently monsters couldn't live anywhere where there's light. I know, dumb kids. As I open the door to go back in, there's this huge explosion behind me across the street and power goes out. The kids start screaming and follow me back into the house. I grab the phone, but there's no dial tone. I get the kids out of the house again, onto the back porch this time, and make it really clear that they're to stay there. But I can still hear the dog whimpering in the basement. I run to the oldest kid's bedroom with the fire extinguisher and flashlight from the kitchen and look under the bed through hazy smoke. The offending candle has gone out, but has burnt a hole in the box spring, which also has gone out. I flip the box spring and blast it with the extinguisher just in case. I then run to the front porch to see the transformer on a telephone pole had exploded. A lightning pole... What? Lighting the pole on fire and taking out the phone and electricity service for the street. I run and check on the box springs, which are still out. I open the bedroom windows to air out the room, then get the kids off the back porch into the living room onto the couch, where they both are just crying their eyes out. The oldest was apologizing for the fire, but insisted that if he didn't keep the candle lit, then, of course, monsters would get him. Fire department shows up for the transformer at around 11. Kids fall asleep on the couch at around midnight after watching the firemen across the street put out the transformer fire. And the power comes back on at about 1:30 a.m. The parents show up at 2:30 a.m. when they were supposed to be back by 11. They're somewhat buzzed and start complaining that the kids are not in bed and the oldest room is trashed with a flipped-over mattress and dry fire extinguisher powder covering the box springs. And to add insult to injury, they straight up refuse to pay me. The situation gets really tense, and would you believe it? The Doberman picks this time to come out of the basement and starts aggressively growling at me. Walked out with $1 to my name, and I never babysat again. So, for the longest time in my teenage years, I earned a few bucks a week by doing babysitting work. It always made me giggle at how there are so many urban legends based around babysitting. The serial killer that stalks the unwitting teen, the call coming from inside the house, pretty much every Halloween movie in some manner that seems to present babysitting as the vocation of those with a death wish, when in reality, the only thing likely to kill you is the boredom. Sure, you get a bratty kid and it makes an evening a little more challenging, but you get a good one, and you're basically sat on the couch for hours on end, watching tedious cable TV shows and counting the minutes until the parents get home. Saying that, I did babysit for one family that ended in a frankly terrifying experience that ended up in me never, ever sitting for them ever again. It only happened once, but sometimes once is enough. So I arrive at this big old house a few blocks away from my parents' house at around 6:30 one Friday evening. The parents of the kid seem incredibly charming, and the kid is one of the more adorable little tykes that I've had the good fortune of minding. We go over a brief list of rules, what the kid is and isn't allowed to eat, how much I'll be paid and how long I'll be sitting for, and that sort of thing. Then the parents head out to whatever fancy party that they had been planning on tending. All goes well for a little while. The kid wouldn't eat their carrots, but when I pretended that they were delicious by taking little bites myself, they soon broke into a smile and pretty much demolished the little bowl of hummus that we were sharing. With the kid fed, I gave her a bath, tucked her into bed, and that's that. It was honestly one of the easier jobs I'd had, right up until the sun started to go down. So once the kid's asleep, I head downstairs to order a pizza on the parents' dollar. Like I said, they were perfectly nice and polite when we first met, and it's not often a job comes with free food. Pizza arrives pretty quickly, and I even tipped the delivery guy a few dollars just to say thank you for being so fast. He's literally counting out the change in dollar bills when his head snaps to the side, like he's looking into the bushes at the side of the house. I ask him if everything is okay. peering out from the door to see what he's looking at. But there's nothing, just dark bushes. He says something along the lines of, sorry, guess I'm just tired. Mind's playing tricks on me. He laughs awkwardly, then walks back to his car while thanking me again for the tip. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it was probably just a cat or something, right? So we got back inside to eat, have a full-on carb overload, and end up just lying there on the couch watching TLC. There were these big bay windows in the family's TV room, and I had drawn the curtains earlier to block out the glare on the TV. Only I hadn't drawn them all the way, and there was a slight crack in the curtains that allowed me to see into the dark front yard. At one point, my eyes were drawn to this little crack, and I could swear I saw a dark shape where streetlights were previously visible. I sit up, focusing my eyes on the shape and wondering if it were my mind playing tricks on me this time, when it moved. I wasn't going nuts. I had been looking at someone or something who was in turn looking at me through the big old windows. That's about when I started to freak out. I had been super chilled all evening, but now I was getting that distinctly paranoid feeling like someone was watching me, someone who didn't exactly have the best of intentions. I run around the house, making sure all the doors and windows are locked as a precaution, all before keeping their cordless phone as close as possible so that, if it came to it, I could call the cops. I was sure I had seen someone, but the chances of them just vacating the area at the sight of flashing lights then returning later could be a huge possibility, and a terrifying one at that. So I decided to shoot my shot only when it would be absolutely necessary. Appearing to waste police time would not be doing me any favors. I suppose I'm just trying to explain why I didn't call the cops right away. I've had friends of mine say that they have just called 911 right then and there, but I wasn't 100% sure of anything right then. I'd seen a shape, not Michael Myers pointing a knife at me. Life isn't black and white most of the time, I was thinking. Anyway, I've secured all the windows and doors, shoved the cordless phone into my hoodie's front pouch, and have even positioned a Little League bat near the couch so that I was sort of armed. So by that point, I started to feel relatively safe again. If there was some creeper lurking outside looking to prey on a teenage babysitter, they would get one heck of a rude awakening when I waved my bat at them and screamed that the cops were on the way. So I lie back on the couch, but naturally find myself unable to relax. I open the curtains back up so I can see if anyone is hanging around in the front yard, keeping my eyes on the windows every so often in between watching whatever social train wreck is on TLC. Nothing happens for a while, and I start to think it was all just in my head or something. Right about the time I get up to wander into the kitchen to grab a drink of water. As I'm in there, I get that intense feeling that I'm being watched. I turn to see that same dark shape in the kitchen window, only this time, I rush into action. I hammer 911 into the phone, telling the dispatcher I need the cops to my address ASAP, that there's a home invasion in progress. I honestly don't know if it was the adrenaline or I was just sick of pervs thinking they can get away with stuff like that, but I just sort of charged. After screaming out that the cops were on their way, I ran into the TV room, grabbing the Little League bat, and just ran for the back door which led out of the kitchen and into the backyard. What happened next is frankly astounding. As I ran at the guy, baseball bat in hand, ready to bash his brains out right there in the yard, I recognized him instantly. It was a face I'd seen before, not long ago at all. It was the kid's dad. So long story short, the dad of the kid I'd been babysitting had, for whatever reason, decided he needed to see what kind of babysitter I was. So apparently he drove his wife to whatever party they were headed to, turned back saying he'd forgotten something, then decided to watch me over the course of about an hour or two to see if I was worth the cash that they were spending. Obviously, since no crime was actually committed, there was no one to charge. The dad offered me a sincere apology, even offered me double the cash just to finish the night up, but I refused. No amount of money could have persuaded me to stay, and needless to say, I was very selective with who I babysat after that. The worst kid I ever babysat for was named Rory. This all took place about 14 years ago now in a small town called Haddington, just outside of Edinburgh in Scotland. It's a nice place in general, but people there can be pretty, well, weird. I'd have to be to volunteer myself for babysitting jobs in a small town like that, where suspicion and malice is rife, and there's a dark secret being hidden in almost every household there is. So, anyway, I'd always been sort of aware of Rory's existence. I'd gone to school with his older brother, Struan, for a few years, who was a similarly creepy little person, but I'd never really encountered Rory on a personal level. And that was all about to change. After I put the notice up in the local off-license that I was offering sitting services, I grew to dread it when my phone rang. I mean, it was mostly normal jobs for normal families, but every so often I'd get a call and I'd just know it was going to be a bad one. And when I got the call from Rory's mom, I knew it was going to be rough. But I couldn't just turn down the job. If you get a reputation for being flaky or unreliable, the phone calls and the money quickly dry up. So once the family had promised me my usual rate, the job was on. It seemed pretty simple. Friday night, 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. with money for a takeaway delivery included. I arrived a few minutes early, just to kind of get myself oriented in the house. It's super important to know where the basics are, but also where stuff like plasters and other first aid supplies are located just in case the kid has an accident. Rory's parents seem pretty friendly, but the parents are always friendly when you're giving them a night off from parenting. But no matter how friendly and chirpy they were, you could kind of tell that they weren't exactly the most normal of families. So just before the parents leave for whatever event they were going to, they introduced me to Rory. And the moment I lean down to say hi, I can tell straight away he is not keen on the evening's proceedings. The first words out of his mouth are, "I don't like her." He looks at me, says nothing, then looks at his mom and dad and says straight up, "I don't like her." I just sort of laughed awkwardly while his parents reassured him that I was there to look after him and that they'd be back before he knew it. But still, the wee laddie glared at me, scowled, and then ran upstairs to his room before slamming the door. I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't faced that kind of hostility before, but it's also a huge buzz to win the kid over, to go from not wanting me there to not wanting me to leave. So Rory's parents leave, telling me he's got a microwavable meal in the fridge that I'm to heat up if and when he gets hungry. But I decide to employ my primary winning over tactic, walking to the bottom of the stairs and calling up, "Rory, I'm going to order a pizza. You can have some if you want. Just come downstairs whenever you're ready." Now this usually has a shy, moody kid smiling and warming up to me, but not Rory. He didn't make so much as a peep. I mean, if I'm honest, there was a moment that I thought he might have, climbed out of his bedroom window or something. I'm serious. That never ever happens when you offer pizza. So I go up, creep towards his room, and I'm about to knock when the door swings open, and the little guy has stood there, fury in his eyes, and he screeches out, "Get away from my bedroom!" before slamming the door in my face. It scared the absolute life out of me, so I just went downstairs and hoped the night would be over as quickly as possible. So since Rory didn't want any pizza, I ordered Indian instead. The delivery driver arrives, I get my food, and I'm sitting there eating it on the couch when I hear little footsteps coming down the stairs. Rory appears in the doorway, and I ask if he's hungry yet. He doesn't say a thing, not for a good minute, so I just kind of smile and carry on eating my chicken korma. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he suddenly asks. I nearly spat out a load of rice, just like this involuntary awkward laughter rising up from my throat. I mean, I literally couldn't believe he just asked me something like that. Of all the questions to make a babysitter feel incredibly awkward, this tops the list. I just reply "Yes, I do actually. He's lovely and he lives just around the corner actually." A lie, of course. I was painfully single at the time, but anything to deter the little brat. As expected, little Rory does not take this well, then sort of marches off into the kitchen. I suspect he's after his food, but I've been given strict instructions not to let him mess around with the microwave or let him try to prepare any hot food. He wasn't quite tall enough to reach the countertop yet, and he was blatantly at risk of scalding himself with the hot food. Only when I follow him into the kitchen to politely tell him that I didn't mind making his food for him, I see him climbing onto a chair that he's pushed towards the countertop. Just as I'm about to stop him, he pulls the biggest kitchen knife he can find out of the knife block before turning towards me with the biggest, most evil-looking grin on his face. I turn, run out of the kitchen and slam the door behind me, leaning on it to prevent him from getting through. That's when this little monster starts stabbing the door, or at least that's what it sounded like. And it wasn't the thickest of wood, so I squeal in fear and hold my body away from the door while leaning on the door handle. I had to hold that door shut for a full half hour while he proceeded to absolutely trash the kitchen. I could hear plates breaking, glasses smashing, all kinds of chaos going on behind the door. I called the parents with the intention of telling them that they had to come home immediately, but they actually just patched my calls. I was left alone, to basically barricade myself into the living room for the remaining few hours of the night. When the parents got back, they went mental, proper rage, and refused to pay me for my services. They basically blamed me for his shocking behavior and swore blind that they'd be telling everyone what a horrible babysitter I was. I cried all the way home. Luckily, the calls didn't dry up, and I actually talked to one family who said they'd completely sympathized with what had happened, knowing full well what a nightmare child that little brat could be. So, that's the scariest time I ever had babysitting, and I implore you, if you're getting into it, be careful who you choose to babysit for. Non-payment could have been the best possible outcome to that night, as I might not even be here to be able to tell this story. I've never been a babysitter, unless you count looking after my little brother on the odd occasion, but I do have a babysitter story for you all. This all happened back when I was about 10 or 11, as it was the last year of primary school for me, and I remember being really excited about going to big school, as my mom and dad phrased it. They were off to some work function, and I needed a babysitter. I distinctly remember them being worried that they wouldn't be able to go, as I think they left it quite late and were worried that they wouldn't be able to find a sitter. I didn't want to be left alone with a stranger, so I remember being absolutely gutted when they said they'd managed to find someone to stay for a few hours on a Saturday evening. But when the time came and the babysitter arrived, I remember thinking that it wouldn't be so bad. She was very pretty and seemed genuinely lovely. Some university student called Sarah, I can't quite remember, but she pretty much won my parents over in the first few minutes, and well, since they liked her so much, I kind of liked her too. She told me we'd have a little slumber party, that we could watch my favorite film, and my parents sweetened the deal by saying that they'd leave us money for some pizza. So I really did perk up for a bit as they showed the girl around the house and actually warmed up to the idea as they left the house, and Sarah, who we'll just call her now for the story's sake, she began to order us pizza. Only, that's when things started to get a bit weird. She asked me what my favorite topping was, in a voice that didn't sound nearly as jolly as before. When I told her I liked pepperoni the most, still my favorite, she just laughed and told me she was a vegetarian. I tried to tell her we could always get 2 smaller pizzas, but she just ignored me as she placed an order for a large spicy veggie one. I hated spice, and I still do. I can't handle chilies for the life of me, even as a grown-up, so the younger me was absolutely heartbroken that I'd been pretty much shut out of the pizza party that we were supposed to be throwing. And it all went downhill from there. There was a knock at the door a little while after she called, and I suspected it was the delivery guy, but it wasn't. From the top of the stairs, I watched as some lad in his own clothes stepped out of the cold and into our hallway. I was confused as to what was going on, where the pizza was and all that, but when the pair of them started sharing this really horrible wet kiss, I got onto the fact that it was obviously her boyfriend or something. And this is all after hearing my parents make it clear to her that she wasn't allowed any company around. So I was really bloody annoyed at this point, like furious. So I snuck down into the kitchen to try and find the house phone to call my mom, only it wasn't in the charger. I trot around for a wee bit trying to find the thing when I realized there's a good chance the babysitter had it with her. I walked down the hall to the living room where she and her boyfriend were, opened the door, and pretty much recoil at what I see. They're doing stuff, right there on the couch. Sarah screams at me to get out and shuts the door, and I respond with asking her for the phone. She doesn't even acknowledge my request, gets up from the couch with fury in her eyes and slams the door on me before screaming through the wood to get back up to my room and be quiet. I told her I was hungry, but again, absolutely no acknowledgement. So I went back up to my room and just bawled my eyes out. So it's pretty important to remember that this was like the mid-90s, back when the internet or mobile phones weren't exactly available or affordable for a family like mine. If this had happened nowadays, it would be a piece of pie to just phone my parents or, hey, even take a photo of the boyfriend being there and that would be that. But I just didn't have those options available to me, and even if I had, this girl was so conniving that she'd probably have found a way around it. But that sort of maltreatment wasn't what scared me. Yeah, it was upsetting, but another danger became more of a priority when I realized that they had trapped the family dog inside the living room with them. I went back downstairs facing my fears and hoping I could at least get Jazz out of the room with them. She was an Australian Shepherd, one of those dogs that's dead shaggy but also looks like someone spilled a can of paint over them or something. I loved her so much and I had to rescue her. So I knock on the living room door, only to get told to go away. I knock again, telling the babysitter that it was important that Jazz had to go outside to have a wee or for her to be taken on a walk so she could do a number 2. Again, she barked at me to go away. I wasn't about to let this happen to my best friend in the world though, so I pushed the door open just in time to see the boyfriend do something frankly unbelievable. So in England, we play cricket, don't we? And the balls are insanely hard. Like, I think they might be even harder than baseballs you Americans play with. Solid cork on the inside with a tough leather binding. People actually died from getting hit on the head with cricket balls. Jazz loved her cricket ball. We tried throwing tennis balls and stuff for her, but I think she just liked that leather smell the cricket ball gave off. Maybe it reminded her of actually chasing an animal or something. I don't know. But either way, I opened the door of the living room to find the boyfriend of the sitter just lashing the cricket ball at Jazz. So hard that when it hit her back leg, she yelped, all high-pitched. I tried to run in to rescue her, to pull her into my room where she could be safe, but the boyfriend was fast. He pushed me back into the hallway, shut the door, and then I'm certain he wedged something against it, because I couldn't open it at all from then on. I went up to my room and cried myself to sleep, only waking up to hear my parents talking to the sitter when they got home. I didn't make a sound. I was just too scared. For some reason, I had it in my head that the boyfriend would hurt them. I don't know. Kids are daft like that, I suppose, but of course, he wasn't there. He left before my mom and dad got home. I think the real nightmare was that the sitter had actually spun some pure sob story about how I'd been really bad and terribly behaved all evening, how I'd been a brat and demanded this, that, and the other, and they made a huge bloody mistake. The absolute wankers, because that cricket ball had left a huge welt on Jazz's hind leg, and when my dad found out that, I'd at least been partially telling the truth about what they'd been up to. And God, you should have seen how livid he was. I won't bore you with the petty details, but let's just say that sitter and her boyfriend ended up actually getting arrested on animal cruelty charges, and I know for a fact that he ended up getting convicted and fined for it. So, I suppose a silver lining to a truly terrible night, but be careful who you're hiring to sit your kids, people. So this is the story of the worst day of my entire life so far. I was just 15 at the time, babysitting my little sister who was a toddler, like about that kind of age where she could walk and open doors. My parents were making a quick run to the store and left me in charge. I was chilling in the TV room. Sis was in her bedroom playing with her dolls or whatever. After a few minutes of watching TV, I noticed it was a little too quiet. I checked her room and she wasn't there. I checked everywhere else with growing alarm, looking and calling for her, but she was nowhere to be found. To my absolute horror, I realized the person I'm supposed to be babysitting is definitely no longer in the house. There was this kids' swing park across the street that she liked, and this wouldn't be the first time that she worked the doorknob successfully and toddled over to play there by herself. So I sprinted over there to look for her, running on pure adrenaline and panic. But there was still no sign of her. I spotted a group of 3 grade schoolers there, so I described her and asked them if they had seen her around. One of the boys told me he saw a girl matching her description get into a blue car. We don't own a blue car, nor do any of the family friends. I can't adequately describe the feeling of dread, panic, and hopelessness that completely overwhelmed me. It was kind of feeling like my heart actually fell out of my chest. I sprinted from one end of the block to the other, hoping to catch a glimpse of this blue car. I ran through and around the adjoining elementary school, hoping maybe she was there. Never mind that I'd already been told that she had gotten into a stranger's car. I was completely irrational, was hoping that I had misheard that kid or something, or maybe, please, God, she was back. After some kind of eternity, I ran back home to call 911. By this time, my parents were back, and lo and behold, my sister was with them. It turns out she did open the door and wander off, but only to the store and back. A stranger had asked her where she lived and then walked her straight back to her house since it was obviously dangerous for her to be out alone. In my panic, I'd completely missed her coming home, and I was furious as to why my parents didn't think to notify me, so I guess it ended okay. I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed for a while. Then I was overcome by an overwhelming urge to punch this little turd who had lied to me. I bolted back to the playground with no clear plan in mind. He wasn't there when I got back. I suppose that's good because I was sufficiently older, bigger, and utterly blind with rage that I probably would have murdered him at that point. An apology, however physically coerced, would have been nice though. Oh, and I'm fairly certain the boy wasn't just mistaken. After all was said and done, I recalled that one of the kids in his little group of friends had started to chime up when she saw me running around in a panic. I just vaguely remember her saying something like, "Hey mister, you should know about your sister." Something in the tone of her voice was apologetic, like she realized how messed up their joke was. But I was completely irrational at that point and ran off to keep searching, and it failed to register until later. Point being, there's a reason why the front page of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says, "Don't panic." Never truer a word said. So this story isn't about me babysitting anymore, but rather a close relative babysitting me and my sister when we were much younger. My parents told us the story when we grew up, and honestly, this has to be one of the last things any babysitter would want to happen to them or anyone in their guardianship. We wince every single time they retell it, and I'm guessing you will too. My parents had decided that they were going to have a little date night for the wedding anniversary and called up a family member to see if they would babysit us for the evening. She adored babies and would always play with us when she would occasionally visit, so she must have appeared to be the best person for the job. Although by the end of this, you might well dispute that idea rather violently. My parents were in the living room getting ready to leave for the night, and we were in our room playing with her. After a little while, she starts throwing me up and down in the air in that playful way that grown-ups do with kids sometimes. Apparently our dad happened to notice this and warned her to be extremely careful since the ceiling fan was at full blast, but decided she was aware and responsible, so he just headed back to the living room to carry on getting changed. After a few more playful tosses in the air, she put me down and started to do the same thing with my sister. Except she wasn't quite as lucky. According to my dad, no more than 30 seconds had gone by when a loud gasp, followed by a blood-curdling scream, echoed all around the house. My parents came rushing to the room, and what they witnessed was something my mom has never, ever been able to get out of her head. She just stood there in shock for a moment, surveying the pure horror of the scene before her. Our babysitter had accidentally tossed my sister into the fan while it was still on, and it wasn't one of those flimsy, cheapo ceiling fans that you can pick up from a Walmart. It was one of those solidly built steel blade fans, built with safety features, sure, but still super heavy. Also, the fan setting was thankfully not set to high, but only to medium. God knows what the damage would have been if it was. And the way my mom tells the story, for the first few moments after walking into the bedroom, she thought my sister was dead. Blood was splattered all over the wallpaper, almost as if someone had been brutally beaten. My sister was on her bed's blood-soaked sheets with a huge gash on her forehead, and you can only imagine what kind of horror was going through our babysitter's mind. An ambulance quickly came to get her cleaned up and was given a lot of stitches in her forehead. My parents were more than relieved the blades didn't strike an eye, that she actually only managed to pick up superficial injuries. The babysitter didn't come around after that, even though everyone got over it pretty quickly since it was an accident. She still has the scar on her forehead today. We would joke around about the scar and how it was actually my plan to take her out to be an only child, or how she got her scar wrong and it's supposed to zigzag like Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar. I suppose, at best, it's an interesting story to tell if anyone asks her about the faint scar on her forehead. During my teenage years, my family and I lived in military housing here in the U.S. A few doors down, there was a new couple with 2 kids who were referred to me since I made a little weekend cash working as a babysitter for some of the families who lived in base housing. Their house was pretty bare and undecorated since they had only been moved in there for a week or so. When I arrived, my mom was showing me around the house with the 3-month-old baby in her arms, showing me where the baby's formula was kept, where I could get myself a bite to eat and stuff like that. I had to admit that I was a little worried about that particular job. 3 months old was by far the youngest baby I'd ever sat for, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think that mom was having similar thoughts. However, they were only going to go to their welcoming event for a couple of hours, and it was right there on base though, so not very far at all. I mean, what could possibly go wrong in such a short space of time? Well, something did go wrong, and it occurred at the very top of the staircase as her 3-year-old called her and she followed me down. A strap on the mom's flip-flop snapped off and she suffered a terrible fall, completely taking me out as she toppled hopelessly down at the bottom, and as she did, she ended up dropping the baby from her arms. Honestly, I'm not sure how it happened, as I'm not exactly famous amongst friends for my agility, quite the opposite in fact. But as I was being sacked, I reached up and just sort of snatched the baby out of the air, grabbing a hold of her onesie and holding her up high as we all hurtled to the bottom. I ended up with a black eye and some bruises where the mom essentially bowled me over, and I thank God whenever I think about this, the baby was luckily completely unscathed. Whereas the mom, she ended up with an open fracture of one leg, right above her knee, and a pretty solid concussion. I mean, the wounds looked horrendous. She was bleeding all over the new cream carpet, but she didn't act as if anything hurt at all, though. She just kept saying, "Thank you. You saved my baby. God bless you. You saved my baby," over and over again as the kid's dad called 911 and rushed an ambulance crew over to the house. They ended up paying me $200 for a 4-hour gig that night, which in 1987 was practically a king's ransom, especially to a teenager like me. But I don't think my pulse slowed down for a week. I'm serious about that. Sometimes I'd think about catching that baby out of the air and I'd feel like I was going to have a panic attack. I pretty much stopped babysitting shortly after that because it freaked me out so much. Not just the event, but word getting around that I was like some superhero with cat-like reflexes when I'm pretty sure if that happened again, I couldn't grab that baby if I tried. I know that sounds crazy, that I probably just should have soaked up the praise and used it to make a ton more money, but it was all just way too much pressure for a young girl like me. This story takes place all the way back when I was still in high school. In order to earn money to fund my video game addiction, I regularly tutored this adorable little 11-year-old girl. We actually got along so well that the parents ended up asking me to babysit her and her little brother a couple of times. One night in particular, the parents were meant to go downtown to watch a baseball game before a few drinks with friends, telling me they'd be back earlier than midnight. Basic babysitting job, right? Wrong. Right around 8 o'clock in the evening, it started raining pretty heavily. We all lived in a Gulf city at the time, and storms can blow in fast before turning into flooding way fast. Once it became horrifyingly clear that we were in for one heck of a big storm, the parents tried to get home as quickly and safely as possible, but the streets had already started to flood, and apparently they ended up trapped in a parking lot. And the irony was lost on me at the time, but not today. Anyway, the kids' parents called and we agreed I'd spend the night in their guest bedroom. While they booked themselves into a motel, I had the kids go to bed, which was kinda dumb as they got absolutely no sleep thanks to the pounding rain, while I sat up in the kitchen to do homework and watch Netflix. After a little while, I started to notice water seeping in from the back doors. They had a large house with like 3 double doors to the back, so it was a buttload of square feet. I got every towel in the house and started wiping up the water and using the towels to block the door. After this had mostly been cleaned up, I went back to the kitchen table to watch more Netflix. Nothing else much to do, right? But I couldn't have been any more than like 15 minutes later when the power cuts out and all the lights shut off. This freaked me out a bit, but I tried to stay as calm as best I could, and that's when the burglar alarm went off in the other room. I pretty much soiled my pants. I was in the pitch-black house with 2 young kids, surrounded by flooded roads that no one could drive on. After a minute or so of almost blind panic, I realized to my horror I was the closest thing in the house to an adult. There was no one looking after me, in fact. I was directly responsible for these 2 kids. So I grabbed the biggest, sharpest kitchen knife I could find and went to go check all the doors. They were all still closed and no one was in the house, so I called the parents. It turns out the alarm went off when the power cuts out and I just needed to shut it off with a code upstairs. This happened about 3 more times over the next few hours. After the power came back on, I thought things had chilled out, but then when we got a tornado warning, I went and got the kids from upstairs and we all hung out in the study for about an hour until the warning passed. At this point, it was about 2 a.m. and I passed out in the guest bedroom. The parents woke me up when they got home at around 7 a.m. and I drove home past giant fallen branches and stalled abandoned cars. It was surreal, but thank God everyone was safe and well in the end. Hi, Let's Read. I'm a huge fan and I've always wanted to be able to send in a true scary story of my own, but I've never really had anything actually scary ever happen to me. Awkward moments, sure, people being outright mean, that too, but never anything legit scary. But all that changed just a few weeks ago before lockdown when I was asked to babysit a neighbor's kid while they went to a party relating to one of their jobs. I'd never, ever babysit for anyone before, so admittedly I was pretty nervous. But if I'd have known what kind of night I had in store for me, I'd have turned the job down in a second. It was made all the worse by the fact that my parents pretty much assured me that it would be an easy $50, and the night would be over before I knew it. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing from the start, but my dad actually managed to talk me out of that headspace. Now I wish I just trusted my gut and stayed well away. So I wandered over to the house at around 7 in the evening, introducing myself to the parents and the kid before they go over a few ground rules. At first, it seemed like my dad was right, that I was just being silly and that if I played my cards right, I could turn this into a regular earner to fund my weekend shopping habits. The parents were lovely and so was the kids, so I got pretty chill pretty quickly and ended up sort of enjoying myself, entertaining the kid after they left with the help of Disney Plus, which I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a huge fan of. Anyway, everything is going well until it comes time to put the kid to bed. Then things start getting a little awkward. The kid straight up refuses, and our new happy little friendship starts to quickly deteriorate. I felt super mean having to lay down the law with the kid, and he went from crying and wailing to shouting and screaming at me that like I wasn't his mom, he hated me and I didn't belong there, stuff like that. I actually kind of hurt, and I started to realize that maybe I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. To be a parent or a guardian, you need to be tough enough to be able to kind of like be the bad guy, if that makes any sense. And if there are any of you out there that are looking to get into babysitting, thinking it'll be an easy few bucks, please reconsider. I've done way easier things for money before and since. Things that don't make you feel terrible for having to have shouted at a kid. But after a while, the whole temper tantrum seems to have tired the kid out, and even though he still seemed upset with me, he went up to his room, got into his pajamas, climbed into bed to sleep. He asked me to read him a story, and since he'd actually done as he's told, I obliged. And when his eyes finally closed over and his breathing slowed, I snuck out of the room and downstairs to leave him get some rest. So about an hour or so later, I was sitting on the couch texting a friend of mine, telling them how babysitting was way harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm working through the leftover chicken pot pie that my mom had given me to take over there, catching up on some episodes of The Mandalorian when the family house phone starts to ring. Thinking it was the parents looking to check up on me, I pick up, greeting the caller with the cheeriest voice I could manage. Only, no one on the other end responds. I say, "Hello?" a few more times, assuming it's a butt dial or a bad line, and hang up, heading back to finish off my pie. No sooner am I sat down again, the phone rings again. I was kind of expecting it, I suppose. Maybe the parents had gone through a tunnel or something. I don't know, but either way, I get up again, head over to the phone and pick it up. Only this time when I do, I can hear breathing on the other end of the line. I give another cheery hello, but there's just the same breathing coming from the other end. When the person finally speaks, it's a super deep voice, obviously a guy, telling me to check on the sleeping kid. I thought it might have been the kid's dad, but there was also something really weird and distorted about the voice too. I responded like, "Okay, I'll go check." And the line goes dead immediately. The kid is fine, sleeping like a rock, so much as I'm kind of creeped out by the weird voice. I figured it must have been the dad. Maybe the parents had argued, I don't know. I try not to think so much about it. But then pretty much as soon as I'm back downstairs, the phone rings again. No caller ID, no nothing. So I answer, unable to prevent this fear from entering my voice. Big mistake. Whoever is calling senses this and starts to giggle down the phone line in that same weirdly distorted voice. What they said next made my blood turn to ice. "Gonna snatch him up. Gonna snatch up the kitty when you're not looking. Gonna get him." And went silent. Totally silent out of fear. And that's when I heard a creak in the floorboards above me. Someone was moving around in the room upstairs. I pretty much dropped the phone and bolt upstairs and into the kid's room to find that he's still asleep, or rather that he very much appears to be asleep. But that same deep, slow breathing isn't there. The more I look, the more it seems like he's almost holding his breath or something. Not only that, but his arm is at this weird angle that makes it look like he's holding on to something under his pillow, something he's trying to hide. In a fury, I pull the pillow up slightly, then I realize what's been happening. Whoever thought it was a good idea to buy an 8-year-old kid a phone is straight up crazy. But under that pillow wasn't just a phone. There was a voice distorter under there too. I grab both and run out of the room, back downstairs where the kid starts throwing another temper tantrum. I felt so dumb, completely played by the kid, made to feel terrible and vulnerable. How could someone be so young, yet so malicious and mean-spirited? The parents arrived back shortly afterwards, and I didn't mention a word of what happened until they paid me in full. Then I read them the riot act. I was never going to babysit for them, and they were completely irresponsible letting their kid have the things like a phone, let alone an actual voice distorter. Turns out the creepy little gadget was their older college-age kids, and that the little guy was fascinated with it and wouldn't give it back to him. But I didn't care. I wasn't about to put myself out there like that. Ever. Again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, I kind of forgot what I was supposed to remember.